Hello everyone, so thank you so much for coming to our seminar on data, the breakfast of champions. I hope you've had a fantastic day so far and are looking forward to our session today. To give you a brief introduction, my name is Molly Courtice and I am a performance consultant at Saffron Interactive. So I've worked with clients of all shapes and sizes, from large corporate global mining organisations to not-for-profits. And my passion for delivering genuine business improvement and using data to help our clients do it is why I'm here today.
Thanks. I'm Noorie Sazen and I have the pleasure of leading Saffron. Prior to my time at Saffron, I was a partner at KPMG and also had a global role at BP. So consulting is in my veins, and that's really helped in terms of focusing on business metrics in particular for our clients at Saffron.
So, as we've said, today we're going to take you through why data really is the breakfast of champions and how your organisation can potentially use it to deliver measurable performance improvements and ROI from your learning. We'll be providing a practical guide for harnessing data and analytics, as well as how you can use that data to develop a truly personalised and variable learning experience for your learners. So, without further ado, let's get going.
So, just as a poll of hands, if you're actually going to be able to use data, then you have to have it. So how many of you that are in HR and L&D feel that you have access to data and therefore have the potential opportunity to get some insights from it? If you want to raise your hands if you have it, and keep your hands down if you don't feel that you have that data. So, some varied ones, yeah. So for those people maybe that had the varied ones, could you maybe explain why you feel that you do but you don't have that data?
Check.
I don't know whether can you hear me now?
Okay.
So thank you so much. Initially, what you said was that you do have access to data, but there's so much of it out there, you don't necessarily know where to start, and it's also very difficult to get together. Yeah? So for those that actually answered yes, that they do have the data, can you just let me know what value does it provide you currently and how are you using it? Anyone who put their hand up to say yes, want to contribute? So maybe that is the conundrum, is that you potentially have access to it, but you don't necessarily know how to use it. Okay, so that gives us a good insight. I was tricking you a little bit because really the question we ought to be asking is, what do you want to actually measure? And that's the real question, and I'll let Molly explain why.
So these are some of the things that you might want to actually look at. So here we've got aspects of performance improvement, we've got revenue, we've got productivity, we've got employee engagement, we've got innovation. And all of these areas are things that directly impact the growth of the business. So, and that is unsurprisingly what the C-suite and the business as a whole are pretty keen to focus on. But one thing to consider is that these actually just scratch the surface, and there are so many other things that the business needs to know. So, but measuring these things as well cannot just come from learning interventions itself. To get a true picture of the business growth and how the business is doing overall, you need both qualitative and quantitative data. And so at Saffron, whenever we create any learning intervention, there are actually two questions that we ask our clients. The very first is, what do you want your people to be doing better or doing differently? And the second question is, how are you going to know that they're doing it? And so the reason that we ask these questions is because often the answers to these questions are actually the things that highlight areas of focus for the business. And so they help to identify the behavioural outcomes and that are measurable. And so it's these that then drive the data points that we want to measure on a practical basis and help to determine what those things are and how they can be captured, but also when they can be captured as well. And so this is a powerful exercise because not only does it make the learning intervention specific to the business's needs, but it also provides the platform for capturing that return on investment. And so ultimately, these questions and these things invite the whole business to engage in the learning outcomes, because to gain a true understanding of any impact measurement, it's likely that the data points will not just come from the learning interventions themselves, it's going to come from the entire business. And so these will be sourced from before the learning, during the delivery, but also long after any learning campaign is completed. And so those two questions from that previous slide are very simple ones, but they're also something that businesses and our clients often actually struggle with defining. And so to help support our clients in actually unpacking the answers to those questions, we often ask this little journey of sub-questions as a precursor. So it's, where are you as an organisation right now, but where do you want to be? And what are the consequences of you as a business and your learners of not getting there? And how can we actually help your people to get there? And what's in it for them? And then fundamentally, how will you know once they've reached the target and once they've got there?
So asking these questions will help identify the data sources that will be used for the data analysis. The sources could include these many different things, and that's the problem. There's so many of them. But together, they do provide not only an understanding of the status quo, but also where the business drivers are and where those data points are going to come from. So you may get your learning data from your LMS. If you've got an LRS or LXP, then you get richer data. It's really important to get the qualitative data as well from employee appraisals or any competency frameworks that you might have. And finally, you do need to engage with the business to get their business data. What is it that they want in terms of their outcomes? Where are they right now? What is their, goal for measurement in terms of client success? How are employees feeling about it all as well? So that qualitative data is really important.
Of what is actually possible. So even if your LMS only reports completions, you can actually combine that with insight into whether that course might have been mandatory or whether it was voluntary or whether you might have put together an adoption campaign before rolling out the learning. And what these pieces of insights alongside that LMS reporting helps to build a wider picture of the data that shows the status quo, which enables you to begin to analyse the difference between results from mandatory training versus the voluntary training that your learners take. And what was the difference between courses that had that adoption campaign or the ones that didn't? And so effectively, what are the aspects from outside the learning that are influencing your learners' behaviour? And then after you've sort of begun that analysis process, we can then begin to consider things like, how long did the learner take? How long did the course take to complete from start to finish? And was it done in one sitting, or did the learner sort of check back in several times and complete it over a number of different sittings? And if it was done quickly, was it because people enjoyed it, or was it because they just clicked next and next and next and next because they were bored of the learning itself? And these are the insights that we need to feed into future learning interventions in order to continue to deliver learning and build on the process that's going to achieve the desired outcomes that the business wants to deliver. And the practical ways of capturing this qualitative data can be done through potentially polls launched straight after learning completion, but they might also be spaced out after the learning to sort of track whether the skill or competency or behaviour has actually been embedded. We might also sort of track this data through social learning, either directly housed on the LMS or perhaps through external services like Yammer. And using these as a method of tracking whether that social learning has actually helped to embed the behaviours, and seeing whether that subject matter has been engaging by sort of looking at the chatter that's going on those social learning platforms, can be generally more revealing than other forms of data. But also, we can look to target managers at intervals after the training's been rolled out, to ascertain whether that performance improvement has actually taken place. And whilst this sometimes can be quite difficult to achieve, if you do it regularly enough, you can get a real picture of that status quo, and sort of how different ways of delivering learning are affecting that baseline analysis that you are already comparing to. And so a way of easing that burden can be for the business as a whole to own the process, so making it a shared responsibility rather than just the responsibility of L&D, so that can sort of further help support the value that L&D can offer the business.
Getting to the next level, so the first is just literally combining completion reports with external data from essentially the business. How do you actually measure learning transfer? Well, if your LMS actually reports data at an interaction level, so both SCORM 1.2 and 2004 can actually track at interaction level, but your LMS has got to be able to report on it. And if it does, you can actually design learning courses themselves where that intervention is then tracked, and that gives you control of understanding how users are actually connecting with that. And you can understand whether learning transfer is taking place by including that formative assessment throughout the course and seeing points at where they start either losing confidence or failing. You can then design the learning to be remedial within the actual course itself, because you can do that from the tracking within the actual course interactions. And even if your course design can't achieve it, at least your LMS will capture that data in terms of how they're performing on those interactions, so that you can then analyse what remedial or follow-up training is actually required. And again, if you combine this with data on how long someone took answering a question, or which units in a module they understood better than others, or at the cohort level, you can also look across demographies, departments, regions, etc. Do they have a better or lesser understanding of particular topics? So you can then direct them to any specific resources, or you can actually direct that data back to the business to get traction for further remedial training, or a change in process potentially within the business. Going further then is whether you have access, in addition to an LMS, to XAPI. Does everyone understand that, or is anyone wanting a little explanation very quickly? Yes? Okay. So XAPI, essentially with SCORM, it tracks at interaction level, but it's really limited in terms of the interactions. XAPI can actually track structured or unstructured points of data. And the great thing about XAPI is that it can inform what a learner is doing in the training, but also track any other activity around that you want. So if you look at, it can even capture sentiment analysis. So sentiment analysis is how a learner is feeling. during that course? Are they feeling confident? Are they concerned? And during the learning, you can then begin directing that learning towards easier or more challenging content. And that kind of data is ultimately very rich and provides not only an inbuilt remedial learning, but builds confidence and curiosity in the moment. And curiosity is the bedrock of self-determined learners. And self-determined learners are exactly what the current workforce needs, because people who are naturally curious and want to go and find a solution are then not just consuming information, they're processors and synthesizers of information. And what that means is when they come across a situation that they haven't come across before, what their natural curiosity will do is put concepts together that they've learnt from different perspectives and be able to overcome that particular barrier. And that is obviously something that we all want to inculcate in our workforces, because change happens so quickly these days. And what XAPI can do is actually get metrics for the business and yourself as to real workforce performance, not just in the learning, but also within the business. So if I can give you a really simple example of how that might work. Say, for example, you roll out some training on Microsoft Teams, something that probably over the last couple of years you've been doing, potentially quite a lot of, or your IT team has been doing quite a lot of. How do you know how people are actually then using Teams? Well, if you actually use XAPI, you could actually track that. So you could track what they were doing before the learning, then the learning happens, and then you can actually see in Teams whether they're actually using it in the way that they've been trained. So this is then gives you the ability to actually see a learner journey both within the learning and outside it, and whether they are actually doing that learning transfer.
So far we've seen how learning analytics can help L&D hone better experiences for learners. And we've also sort of seen how data can be used to measure that business impact. So I think it's important to not forget who's central to all of this learning, which is the actual learner themselves. So in the same way that L&D or HR or the business might be interested in that data, the data can actually be a powerful tool for the learner themselves to achieve that eventual behaviour change. By actually playing back that data to the learner, which is often can be done usually through dashboards on the LMS and things like that, we can actually use the data within the learning courses to motivate the learner themselves at that moment of the learning. And a simple example of this is often used in serious games and that sort of thing. But more advanced analytics can drive the learner to explore further development opportunities and take chances within the learning within a safe environment that they might normally not do. So, for example, in a training simulation that we put together for Ernst & Young, when faced with a dilemma, learners were actually given the opportunity to have 3 different choices and 3 different pathways. So if they couldn't make up their minds, they were given the opportunity to see how their peers had responded. And so this provides a multitude of different data points that the business can then look at. So firstly, it shows how many are led by their peers. And secondly, it shows how many were willing to make their own decisions. But thirdly, it shows how, having looked at how their peers responded, who chose to follow how their peers had responded, or who actually chose to make their own decisions and follow their own pathway. However, there was also a sort of secondary thing that happened after that. If they did choose to follow to sort of see how their peers had responded, they actually ended up losing points in the overall gaming simulation. So But this provided those who were potentially uncertain about the pathway that they wanted to take the opportunity to put themselves in situations that they might be unfamiliar with, and gave them the confidence to follow that alternative pathway. And so by tracking those that were actually more independent of thought, Ernst & Young were able to sort of see the number of those individuals who ended up rising through the leadership ranks as a result of that course. And another example of this is in a 6-hour-long blended learning simulation that we put together for PwC, which was centered around developing the soft skills of project management. So the simulation actually tracked the learner's decision-making in a long, immersive narrative that consisted of several different alternative outcomes based on the behaviours that they exhibited throughout the course. But, are we able to? But in the final stages of the course, they are actually invited to nominate themselves for an internal award. And so this nomination took the shape of a self-assessment. And they were given the opportunity to sort of reflect on the key competencies that PwC were looking to measure as a result of this course. And as you'll be able to see, their self-assessment score was directly compared to the score that the course itself captured from the learning interactions and the answers throughout the course. And so by showing the learner the difference in how they thought they had performed and how the simulation had rated them, it was actually holding a mirror directly up to the learner and displayed the difference between their self-perception and their actual performance. And so the key thing here to note is that as individuals, when we receive that feedback from people who we disagree with, our mind is often programmed to reject it. But seeing these unbiased results in black and white in the simulation itself actually enabled the learner to sort of consider whether their actions or behaviour or outcome needed to change. And so in PwC's case, this output of data provided the foundation for further one-to-one performance conversations and goal setting. And the results were actually an accelerated pathway towards development.
So as you'll recognise, a lot of this richer data needs some sort of external intervention. And if that's not available to you, then you can actually come to us either to build the courses in the format from the outset so that you don't actually have to change your LMS. As you saw in the PwC, it is possible to actually build those learning analytics within a course. Secondly, you can still put those courses that you're building or your external providers are building on your LMS, but also have an external LRS, the XAPI element, which we can host for you. We're happy to do that, so that you can get those rich analytics yourself and see those learner journeys. So all of those things are possible. It's up to you to decide on which pathway you want to go to. Any questions?
Yeah.
No burning questions. We're also just over there on the stand over there, so feel free to come and have a chat.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.